crazy mother.
Hey guys, what's up? So as a language learner now, I'm kind of involved in a few communities and such, and I also follow a lot of YouTubers who learn languages, and I've seen an interesting phenomenon which I would call language dabbling. More specifically, I'd call language dabbling learning various languages, but just a bit in each one. Now, there's nothing wrong inherently with language dabbling, but one problem I see is that a lot of times language dabblers feel like they're learning a lot when really all they're doing is accumulating bits and pieces of each language. Now again, there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but if your goal is to be able to use the language well, to communicate smoothly and talk about things you want to talk about, then you want to go for language mastery rather than language dabbling. And what I mean by language mastery is two things: competence and automaticity. Competence is just another way of saying skill. So it's the ability to speak, the ability to catch what you hear, the ability to use vocabulary and grammar well. Automaticity is more of a sense of flow. It's the ability to use the language without having to think too much about it. That being said, let me talk about some differences between language mastery, which would require focus on one language, and language dabbling, which means getting to learn a whole bunch of languages. I think maybe the most important difference is that it takes enough time as it is to learn one language. So obviously the more languages you learn, the more time you're going to need. So what this means is, if you're going to go down the road of language dabbling, then your time management skills need to be on point. I'd say the most important thing when you're learning a language is being consistent. If you're taking days off, or if you're learning kind of sporadically or when you feel like it, you're not really going to retain much, and you're definitely not going to grow that much. The second thing is, being a human being with human needs, who probably has to work and has to cook and take care of their house and that sort of thing, you're really not going to be able to allocate massive amounts of time to various languages. More likely you're going to have most of your time focused on one language, and whatever you've got left will be focused on the others. So what this means also is that you're going to need more patience. Because of the decreased amount of time that you'll have, particularly for the less important languages, growth is going to be really slow. One thing I would definitely recommend against is learning two languages at the same time. This is also called simultaneous language learning. Instead, I would recommend sequential language learning, which is focusing on one language for a while until you develop some competence in it, and then starting a new language. Basically stealing this idea from Luca Lampariello, but I agree that having a core language rather, will lend itself to so many other areas of learning a new language that it's absolutely vital to start from there. In addition to that, if you've already overcome the hurdles of being a beginner in one language, and then with that experience start a new one, being a beginner all over again will just be much easier. So also, because it's so much harder to see growth when you're dabbling in various languages, it's also easier to get frustrated. And for this reason, I recommend, if you're going to dabble in several languages, to try to learn ones that are closer to your language family. So for example, if you're a native English speaker, something like French or Spanish or Portuguese would be comparatively easier than, say, Arabic or Russian. So in the end, I really recommend mastering one language rather than dabbling in a whole bunch of others. But if you're going to dabble in some other languages, let me give you a few tips to help you out. First, if you're learning two or more languages where one is more difficult than the other, I would suggest devoting more time to the more difficult languages. This is because what keeps us motivated, what keeps us going, is seeing some progress. And if you're not spending enough time with the difficult languages, you're not going to see much of it in that. Whereas with easier languages, you can devote a little less time and still see some progress. Kind of on the same wavelength as this, if you're at a higher level in a certain language, I would also recommend spending more time on that. When you're a beginner, the learning curve is just like this. Just a little bit of time can definitely show some results. But as you get better, you have to focus more and more on detailed things, and so your progress starts to look slower. And really one of the big challenges in trying to take on other languages, particularly if they're not related to each other, is that at some point, some sort of immersion is what you're going to need to boost yourself from one level to the next. And so the more separate languages you learn, say it's like you've got like Spanish, Russian, Japanese, the harder it'll be to get that environment or those structures in place. If you're focused on one language, it's easy to find TV shows and resources and people and places that you can put yourself in or that you can use in order to really immerse yourself not only in the language but in the culture. But if you start adding on other languages, it gets harder and harder, more time consuming, and maybe more costly. And because, just like almost any other skill, language is something you've got to use to maintain and improve. Again, the more languages you have, the more difficult that becomes. One possibility here is you can use a second language to learn a third one. So let's say you've been learning Spanish for a few years, so you've gotten pretty decent at it, and you want to tack on German. Well, rather than using your native language, which might be English for example, to learn German, you could use your Spanish to learn German. And that way you're maintaining and practicing both languages at the same time. But really it boils down to you. You have to gauge what you can and cannot do, and you also have to determine why you're learning languages. For instance, if it is just a hobby for you, something that's mentally stimulating and enjoyable, and you like doing it for its own sake, then I'd say by all means, go ahead and dabble in a bunch of languages if you'd like to. On the other hand, if what you really want, what really gets you going, is the idea of really getting a handle on a language and really being able to communicate to people from that culture, then mastering a language is definitely going to make it easier for you to reach that goal. As always, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope it was helpful in some way. If you would like to see more videos like this, please subscribe. I do upload at least once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times. If you have any questions at all or any requests for any videos, please let me know in the comments section or send me a message directly. Until next time guys, peace and good luck with your language studies.
For the best, yeah, I'm plotting for the best, coming straight from the dirt. I'm sprouting up a stem, here I come, your success, where you at?